Marines, we all know them. Some of us love them, some of us hate them. Today I'm going to be making a video on the Marines' influence throughout the story with their past, present, and future. So the Marines are obviously an organization in the world, and they are under like the CP agents and everybody else, but they still operate throughout the world, and they're like a much larger scale organization that everyone knows and that some people in the One Piece world love, some people in the One Piece world hate because they're pretty corrupt. And basically throughout the story we've seen them do a bunch of good things, we've seen them do a bunch of bad things, we've seen them do things in the middle that like are kind of good, kind of bad. Their main point is of course to fight the opposing side of the kind of scale, which are the pirates. Of course, pirates, they are bad. They like pillaging villages and killing random people and like doing other bad stuff that what I wouldn't want to say because YouTube will probably not care about this video, but I wouldn't want to say it anyway just in case. And basically the Marines are obviously the main people that are coming up to stop that kind of disgusting activity. So since they're part of the world government and since they have all this influence throughout the world, they're supposed to be seen as the like kind of good guys throughout like the world, especially with the propaganda that's been spread about them. Like for instance with Sora, who is that main like marine superhero that fights against the Germa, who are the bad guys in that situation. So in that sense, the Marines are supposed to be seen as the good guys, but throughout the story we've seen them do a bunch of weird, chaotic stuff that would not be considered the best in most people's minds. So they have bases like throughout the world, which threaten the pirates that are like most apparent in the world, even though depending on the base there can have very strange people. Like you see places like G5, which have people that are not the greatest, but they're not necessarily like pirates, but because they're in G5 they're not becoming pirates. So it's just that way of not just like actively trying to find people that are seeking justice, but finding people that they can control and have them not go against the world order just to be better for the entire world. And they need to like seek out people like that just to have not as much chaos be there, because as we saw like in the very beginning, like before the canon of the story, like 60 years ago or whatever, then the Marines didn't have as much influence, but they had like more powerful members. But as like the story continued, it became like a more organized organization, and then more people wanted to join, and then more things happened, and now you have all sorts of people in the Marines. And like the oldies of course are like definitely there for very specific reasons, and then you see people like Sakazuki who are obviously there just to enforce this kind of justice, and we have no idea how he got there, but we just know that this is what he wants and this is what he's always fearing for. And when the Great Pirate Era began and more people were being affected by pirates, so then Marines had more reason to build up their forces because more people wanted to join. And as a result of that, we get to see like all sorts of Marines in the organization. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, but all of them like sort of have this goal in the back of their head that they want to take out pirates, even though as we know not all pirates are necessarily like completely bad people. But even if they grow as the organization, then especially in the New World, they have a lot less control, because the New World is specifically supposed to be an entire place where the world government has just like less control like over everything in general, because the New World is chaotic to the point where the old world is called paradise now, of course. And then the only time we see Marines like in general, like most of the times in the latest few arcs, it's been with like a big boy like an admiral or something else. So it's hard to see like young or smaller Marines get like a lot of screen time or influence, because like the foes that they're facing are just a lot more powerful. And like we don't even know that much about like the Marines and like how they train or how they get like hockey or other kinds of abilities, because we know that like the Rokushiki is something that just comes in and out kind of. Like Coby knows some of the Rokushiki techniques, even though that's a thing that's specifically for like CP9 and other kinds of organizations. So having like other abilities like hockey be involved in like their training would make sense, even though we haven't seen it much in the story. And I feel like this is one of the Marine reasons why they've like sort of gotten left behind in the world. And another reason could be like Sakazuki, of course, because of the times we've seen him. It's just because like there's been more chaos in the world and he hasn't been able to do jack shies about it, and he's kind of mad about that. And as we've seen, he's just been going on like random, not rampages, but taking it out on like literally the entire organization. So it doesn't really make sense why he would be Fleet Admiral, but okay. A lot of people thought that organizations like the Marines, they would have a lot more of an influence in like story arcs moving forward. However, we haven't really seen much of them since Dressrosa, and a lot of people thought that they were going to show up in an arc like Wano specifically, where you have all these factors at play, and you obviously have like two Yonkos there, so the Marines going to stop them would just make sense naturally. But the thing is, we've only seen CP0, and this probably one of the only organizations that's going to show up in Wano, unless the Marines are only going to show up at the end, like during Act 4, to do like a kind of cleanup or whatever. But I feel like there are already enough factors that play in Wano with just the sheer amount of characters that are featured in that story arc. But beyond Wano, what will we see of them? That is the question. So we know that the Straw Hats are most likely going to go to places like Elbaf or anywhere else, and we might see like a bunch of things with the Marines, like going out, doing random other work, or doing things like getting or apprehending the warlords. But that's not just like something that we would see, which is one of the most likely places that we would see them. However, they don't really have much of a place on places like Elbaf or whatever, because we've been setting up that there's not as much Marine influence there, but we've seen things from like CP0, CP agents in general, and we've also seen connections that Elbaf has with like pirates, and the only connection that we have between Elbaf and the Marines is probably Jaguar D. Saul, because he's also a giant, but the thing is, he wanted to separate himself from Elbaf, so it just goes to show that I don't think the Marines are going to have an influence in an arc like Elbaf specifically, and I don't know what other kinds of story arcs are going to come next because they haven't happened. But the one thing that we have confirmed is, of course, the final battle that's going to take place, which is going to make Marineford look like some kind of kid's playground. So of course, that's probably where the Marines are going to show up, and that's where we're going to see most of them and have a kind of climax for where they're going to go throughout the rest of the story. And I said earlier that there are, of course, good and bad Marines, but then there are also like the difference between like the Marines that have been there for a long time, like Suru, Sengoku, Garp, etc., and then like the younger Marines that we're seeing now, like Coby or someone like Smoker, for instance. And a lot of those people I just mentioned are most likely in this sort of organization, which is not necessarily like affiliated with the Marines, because I think that their whole point is that they're hidden from the Marines, and that they not just want to be hidden from them, but they're kind of like trying to not just reshape, but maybe overthrow the current kind of system that the Marines have in place. So that's a place where we can see like a lot of the old characters show up and have like their last kind of hurrah. But the thing is, we know like characters like Garp and Sengoku specifically do not really want to be in this job much longer, and they're kind of just there because they know too much, and they kind of have to stay in the organization because of that. But otherwise, they probably would have just retired in general. But we've also seen other characters like Suru who are still like in the game and actively like trying to catch pirates or whatever. But we're not going to see much of her probably until the final war, and even then we might not get to see much of her because she'll probably get overshadowed by like literally all the other characters that we want to see and enjoy during this like last final arc that could get like any sorts of fights or matchups. And that's the only place where Marines like that could show up in the story. But then coming to the final climax, there's like a large likelihood that someone like Coby, who is now like leading that younger generation of the Marines, could come and step up and then eventually become like some kind of big boy in the Marines or just the organization in general. And after the final war, where a bunch of different things could happen, the Marines are definitely going to have to be reshaped, and that's where Coby could obviously come in and like take it over. But after that point, what's going to happen with the Marines? Because like pirates are still going to exist. Like it's not like they're just going to outlaw piracy and that's just going to work, because piracy's already been outlawed and like obviously people are already not following the rules. So like, is Coby going to become like someone like the other Marines that are now like more about absolute justice? And I don't think that's a large likelihood. So of course, I feel like after the story is over, there's going to have to be a lot of reforms in the world. And after that, the Marines are definitely not going to have as large of a place in the world. And that's pretty much it for the video. If you did like, please do like, comment, subscribe. Leave a comment about your theories about the future of the story, and I'll see you in the next video.